My wife stole from my client accounts to fund her gambling addiction. I called the SEC immediately. What she didn't realize was that betraying a financial advisor means facing someone who knows every regulatory agency, every audit procedure, and exactly how to destroy someone's financial life legally. My name is Bradley Mitchell, 43 years old, licensed financial advisor and investment manager with Mitchell Wealth Management in Charlotte, North Carolina. For 18 years, I've built my practice around one fundamental principle: absolute fiduciary responsibility to my clients. I manage over $47 million in assets for 340 families, helping them build wealth, plan for retirement, and protect their financial futures. What I never expected was that the biggest threat to my clients' money would come from inside my own home. Amanda and I met in 2009 when she was a successful real estate agent and I was building my financial advisory practice. She was 28, ambitious, and we shared similar goals about building wealth and creating financial security. We married in 2011 and spent the next decade building what looked like the perfect professional couple's life. Amanda understood the financial services industry better than most spouses. She'd worked with mortgage brokers, understood investment concepts, and knew how wealth management operated. When I talked about client portfolios, regulatory compliance, or market strategies, she could follow the conversation intelligently. That knowledge would eventually become the weapon she used against me and my clients. For the first 8 years of our marriage, Amanda was the ideal partner for a financial advisor. She helped with client events, understood the demands of my profession, and supported the long hours required to build a successful practice. We lived comfortably, but not extravagantly, saving and investing our own money according to the same principles I taught my clients. The changes began in 2019 when Amanda started what she called recreational gambling during girls' weekends in Las Vegas and trips to Cherokee Casino. Initially, it seemed harmless. She'd set a $500 budget for casino visits and stick to it. She'd come home with stories about slot machines and blackjack tables, sometimes winning small amounts, sometimes losing her budget. "It's just entertainment," she'd explain, "like going to expensive dinners or shows. I'm not trying to get rich gambling." I didn't see any cause for concern. Amanda was financially sophisticated. She understood odds and probabilities, and she seemed to treat casino visits as expensive entertainment rather than investment opportunities. But recreational gambling has a way of becoming something more serious, especially for people with access to substantial amounts of money. By 2020, Amanda's casino visits became more frequent. Weekend trips turned into week-long excursions. Her gambling budget increased from $500 to $2,000 per trip. She started playing online poker and sports betting, claiming she'd developed systems that gave her advantages over other players. "I'm actually pretty good at this," she'd say, showing me occasional winnings on her phone. "I think I understand gambling psychology better than most people." What I didn't realize was that Amanda was only showing me her wins, never mentioning the losses that were becoming increasingly substantial. The first red flag came in early 2021 when Amanda asked to help with administrative tasks at my office. She'd been working part-time in real estate since the market downturn, and she suggested she could assist with client communications, appointment scheduling, and basic portfolio management tasks. "You're always stressed about keeping up with client needs," she said. "I could help with the simple stuff, free you up to focus on the complex financial planning." Amanda was intelligent, professional, and already familiar with my business operations. Having spousal assistance with administrative work wasn't unusual in smaller financial advisory practices. Many successful advisors relied on family members for office management, especially during busy periods. I added Amanda as an authorized user on several client communication systems and gave her access to portfolio management software for basic tasks like generating reports and updating client contact information. This decision would prove to be the most catastrophic mistake of my professional career. What I didn't know was that Amanda's gambling losses had escalated far beyond recreational entertainment. She developed what addiction specialists call a gambling disorder. a compulsive need to chase losses with bigger bets, funded by increasingly desperate measures to access money. Amanda had been borrowing against credit cards, taking cash advances, and liquidating her personal investments to fund gambling activities that were spiraling out of control. By the time she asked for access to my office systems, she was already $35,000 in debt to casinos and online gambling platforms. The theft began small and sophisticated. Amanda started by skimming tiny amounts from client accounts with large balances. $200 from a $400,000 retirement portfolio, $500 from a $800,000 investment account. The amounts were small enough to attribute to market fluctuations or minor accounting discrepancies. As a financial advisor, I knew that clients rarely scrutinize minor variations in their account balances, especially in volatile markets where daily fluctuations can be significant. Amanda's background in real estate had taught her to understand how people interact with financial statements. Most clients focus on overall performance rather than analyzing every line item. Her theft strategy was methodical and calculated to avoid detection. Amanda would transfer small amounts from client accounts into a business checking account she'd opened in my name, claiming it was for administrative expenses related to client services. She'd then immediately transfer those funds to personal accounts and use them for gambling activities. The transfers were always small enough to seem like legitimate business expenses. $300 for client meeting expenses, $600 for professional development materials, $400 for office supplies and equipment. For 6 months, Amanda's theft pattern went undetected because the amounts were minimal and the transfers appeared to be legitimate business operations. But gambling addiction has a way of escalating beyond anyone's ability to control. By fall 2021, Amanda's gambling losses had grown to over $80,000. Her small-scale skimming wasn't generating enough money to cover her debts, and casino creditors were demanding payment on outstanding obligations. That's when Amanda's theft strategy became more aggressive and desperate. Instead of skimming small amounts from multiple accounts, Amanda began making larger transfers from specific high-balance portfolios. Instead of $200, $500 transfers, she started moving $2,000, $5,000 at a time, gambling that clients with substantial assets wouldn't notice moderate decreases in their account values. The larger transfers required more sophisticated documentation. To avoid triggering compliance alerts in our portfolio management system, Amanda created fake invoices for investment research services and portfolio consulting fees to justify the increased business expenses. Her real estate background had taught her how to create professional-looking documentation, and her access to my office systems allowed her to generate convincing paperwork that would pass casual inspection. For 4 more months, Amanda's escalated theft strategy continued to avoid detection. She was stealing approximately $8,000, $12,000 per month, using the money to cover gambling debts and fund continued casino activities. But 2 factors were working against Amanda's theft operation: my professional training in detecting financial irregularities and the regulatory compliance requirements that govern all financial advisory practices. The discovery came in March 2022 during my quarterly portfolio review process. As a licensed financial advisor, I'm required to conduct comprehensive quarterly reviews of all client accounts, analyzing performance metrics, fee structures, and expense allocations. This process involves detailed examination of every transaction, transfer, and account activity. While reviewing the fourth quarter 2021 performance data, I noticed that several high-balance accounts were showing lower returns than comparable portfolios in similar market conditions. The performance gaps weren't dramatic, but they were consistent across multiple accounts in ways that suggested systematic rather than random variations. My initial assumption was that there might be fee calculation errors or administrative mistakes affecting the account performance. As a fiduciary, I'm legally obligated to investigate any irregularities that might impact client returns. I began a detailed audit of the affected accounts, tracing every transaction, fee, and expense allocation over the previous 12 months. What I found was devastating. The business expenses that Amanda had been documenting weren't actually business expenses at all. The invoices for investment research services were from companies that didn't exist. The portfolio consulting fees were being paid to bank accounts that had no connection to any legitimate financial services. Every suspicious transaction traced back to the business checking account Amanda had opened, and every dollar from that account had been transferred to personal accounts associated with gambling activities. Amanda had stolen $127,000 from my client accounts over an 8-month period. As a financial advisor, I understood immediately that this wasn't just theft. It was securities fraud, a federal crime that would trigger investigations by multiple regulatory agencies and potentially destroy my entire career. But I also understood that my response to this discovery would determine whether my clients, my business, and my professional reputation could survive Amanda's betrayal. The first call I made was to my compliance attorney, explaining the situation and requesting guidance on reporting, requirements, and client protection procedures. Bradley, she said after reviewing my documentation, you need to contact the SEC immediately. Client fund theft triggers mandatory reporting requirements, and attempting to cover this up would make you complicit in the fraud. The second call was to my professional liability insurance carrier, notifying them of the potential claims and requesting coverage for client restitution. The third call was to the SEC's Enforcement Division. This is Bradley Mitchell, licensed investment advisor in Charlotte, North Carolina. I said to the intake officer, I need to report securities fraud involving client account theft by a family member with authorized access to my business systems. The fourth call was the most difficult. I contacted each affected client personally to explain what had happened and outline the steps I was taking to protect their interests. Mr. Johnson, I said during the first of these conversations, I need to inform you of a serious issue affecting your investment account. My wife has been stealing funds from client portfolios, including yours. I've already contacted federal authorities, and I'm taking immediate steps to make you whole. The client reactions ranged from shock to anger to concern about the security of their remaining investments. But because I was being completely transparent and taking immediate corrective action, most clients appreciated my honesty and professional handling of the crisis. Within 48 hours of discovering Amanda's theft, I had reported the securities fraud to the SEC, contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, notified all affected clients personally, implemented new security procedures to prevent future unauthorized access, begun the process of liquidating personal assets to provide immediate client restitution. Amanda's response to being confronted was a mixture of denial, minimization, and desperate attempts to shift responsibility. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, she said. When I showed her the transaction records, I was going to pay it all back as soon as I had a good winning streak. I never meant to hurt your clients. Amanda, you stole $127,000 from people who trusted me to protect their money. There's no paying it back from gambling winnings. You've committed federal securities fraud. You don't understand, she continued. I had a system. I was tracking patterns in poker games and sports betting. I just needed more capital to make the system work properly. This is classic gambling addiction reasoning. The belief that the next bet, the next game, the next system will solve all the problems created by previous losses. Amanda, you've destroyed my career and betrayed my clients. I have already called the SEC and the FBI. You need to contact a criminal defense attorney immediately. The federal investigation moved swiftly once I provided comprehensive documentation of Amanda's theft activities. The SEC investigation focused on whether my firm had adequate compliance procedures and whether I had been negligent in providing Amanda with access to client accounts. Because I'd reported the theft immediately upon discovery and taken prompt corrective action, the SEC determined that the violations were the result of unauthorized access rather than systemic compliance failures. The FBI investigation focused on Amanda's criminal liability for securities fraud and money laundering. The evidence I'd provided, transaction records, fake invoices, gambling activity documentation, made the criminal case straightforward. Amanda was arrested 6 weeks after my initial report to federal authorities. The charges included securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. But the personal and professional consequences extended far beyond Amanda's criminal prosecution. My marriage was obviously over. You can't rebuild trust with someone who's stolen from your clients and destroyed your professional reputation. I filed for divorce immediately after Amanda's arrest. My financial advisory practice faced severe challenges. Even though I'd made all affected clients whole through personal asset, liquidation, and insurance coverage, several clients transferred their accounts to other advisors. The negative publicity affected my ability to attract new clients. Most difficult was the personal financial devastation. I liquidated $180,000 in personal investments and retirement accounts to provide immediate restitution to affected clients. My house was mortgaged to the maximum to cover insurance deductibles and legal fees. Amanda's gambling addiction had destroyed not just our marriage, but our entire financial foundation. The criminal proceedings took 8 months to resolve. Amanda ultimately pleaded guilty to federal securities fraud charges in exchange for cooperation with the investigation and agreement to pay restitution. She was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The restitution order required her to pay $127,000 to my client fund, though her personal assets were insufficient to cover even a small portion of that amount. Amanda served 14 months in federal prison before being released to a halfway house program that included mandatory gambling addiction treatment. The regulatory consequences were less severe than they could have been. The SEC imposed a $25,000 fine on my firm for inadequate supervision procedures, but allowed me to continue practicing under enhanced compliance monitoring. The enhanced monitoring required quarterly reporting to the SEC, annual third-party audits of my compliance procedures, and restrictions on family member access to client accounts. But the most significant consequence was the complete restructuring of my business operations and personal life. I rebuilt my financial advisory practice with an enhanced focus on transparency, security, and client protection. The negative publicity actually attracted some new clients who appreciated my handling of the crisis and my commitment to making clients whole despite the personal cost. I implemented comprehensive compliance procedures that exceeded regulatory requirements, including real-time transaction monitoring, segregated client funds, and independent oversight of all account activities. My personal finances recovered slowly but steadily. The insurance coverage, client account performance, and new business growth allowed me to rebuild the retirement savings I'd liquidated for client restitution. 2 years after Amanda's theft was discovered, my financial advisory practice was more successful than it had been before the crisis. The enhanced compliance procedures and transparent business operations had created a competitive advantage in attracting clients who prioritized security and ethical management. Amanda was released from federal supervision in 2024 and relocated to another state. She's prohibited from working in any capacity that involves access to other people's money, and her gambling addiction treatment is ongoing. We have no contact, and our divorce settlement included comprehensive financial protections to prevent any future access to my business or personal accounts. Looking back, I'm struck by how Amanda's gambling addiction created a perfect storm of betrayal that threatened everything I'd built professionally. And she understood my business well enough to steal systematically, had legitimate access to client systems, and possessed the real estate background necessary to create convincing documentation for her theft activities. But Amanda had made one critical miscalculation. She'd chosen to steal from someone whose entire career was built on detecting financial irregularities and protecting other people's money. When you betray a financial advisor, you're not just stealing money, You're attacking someone whose professional training, regulatory knowledge, and ethical obligations create a comprehensive framework for responding to exactly that kind of betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me that Amanda's theft was discovered through the same quarterly review process I used to protect my clients from external fraud. The compliance procedures designed to detect outside threats worked perfectly when applied to internal betrayal. Amanda thought her gambling addiction could be funded through systematic theft from people who wouldn't notice small amounts missing from their investment accounts. She forgot that those accounts were managed by someone whose job was noticing exactly those kinds of irregularities and whose legal obligations required immediate reporting to federal authorities. The most satisfying aspect of the resolution wasn't Amanda's criminal prosecution or the rebuilding of my business. It was the knowledge that every affected client had been made completely whole despite the personal financial cost. My fiduciary responsibility to my clients had been maintained even in the face of the most personal betrayal possible. Today, my financial advisory practice continues to grow, now managing over $62 million in client assets, with enhanced security procedures and regulatory compliance that exceeds industry standards. The experience taught me that professional expertise can be your greatest defense against personal betrayal, but only if you're willing to use that expertise ethically and completely, regardless of the personal cost. Amanda learned that betraying someone whose career is built on financial compliance means facing federal investigations, criminal prosecution, and systematic destruction of your financial life through entirely legal regulatory processes. Sometimes the best revenge isn't personal, it's professional. And sometimes protecting the people who trust you means sacrificing everything to ensure that trust remains justified. My wife thought she could steal from my clients and hide behind the protection of marriage and family loyalty. She discovered that when you attack someone's professional obligations and fiduciary responsibilities, those obligations take priority over every personal relationship. In the end, Amanda's gambling addiction destroyed our marriage, but it strengthened my commitment to the clients who depend on me to protect their financial futures. That's exactly how it should be.